Hey guys, it's Aptrix here. Today we'll be taking a look at one of the best Nintendo Switch emulators for iOS devices out there. You can play games like Let's Go Pikachu, Sonic Mania, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and lot more. Well, the Nintendo Switch emulator that I have right here is the MelonNX Nintendo Switch emulator, which requires JIT as well as extended RAM. So I'll talk more about the specifics of this Nintendo Switch emulator later on in this video. But first of all, let's take a look at this emulator itself. To set it up, you'll need to side load it from your PC using sideloadly. The process of setting it up is a bit complicated because you also need JIT, which can be enabled by using Stick Debug, an app which is officially available on App Store. You'll also need an software known as Get More RAM. This software needs to be added for increased memory limit inside the MelonNX Nintendo Switch emulator. To get started, MelonNX is a completely open source Nintendo Switch emulator for iOS devices, currently under development, and it can only run few games. Not all the games work, but it does run games like Red Dead Redemption and even Hollow Knight Silksong on few devices. Well, before I show you guys the settings and talk about the setup process, let's just go ahead and run this emulator first. As you guys can see, it crashes quite a lot, so you need to launch it using Stick Debug for the JIT. Once you launch the emulator, just flip it to the landscape orientation, launch the game that you want to play. Afterwards, you'll need to wait for a few seconds, and here we go. Our Sonic Mania is about to start on our iOS device. So here we go, you can see towards the top right corner of your screen the FPS which we are getting while emulating Sonic Mania. Now most of the games work with proper graphical output, so MelonNX is actually pretty well optimized for iOS devices. You don't face major graphical issues, and it is very hard to run this emulator on iOS devices, so huge props to the developer who built this emulator. Now to set this emulator up on your own iOS devices or even iPads, you'll need to use sideloadly as I mentioned before, but the procedure is bit difficult. So if you want me to make a dedicated tutorial talking about how to set up this Nintendo Switch emulator on our iOS devices, I can do that. But one of the YouTube channels known as Everyday iTech has made a very nice setup video on this emulator, which you guys can watch if you don't want to wait for my video. But yeah, of course, to run this Nintendo Switch emulator on your iOS devices, you'll need to legally dump your Nintendo Switch firmware as well as all the necessary stuff such as keys. Afterwards, you'll need to set up this emulator like you do with any Nintendo Switch emulator on Android. For example, importing your keys and firmware. Afterwards, this emulator will start. To start configuring it, you can enter the settings where you can see lot of options. Now currently I have not launched this emulator using Stick Debug because to close the game you'll need to close the emulator. I reopened this emulator and now without using Stick Debug, so it says JIT not acquired. You guys can change some of the following settings known as resolution scaling. For example, the lower the resolution, the better FPS or performance you will get while running this emulator. You can also enable shader cache, disable VSync, texture recompression is turned on, you can enable docked mode. Performance overlay has also been turned on. You can also enable macro HLE. Afterwards, aspect ratio, make sure to set it to stretched full screen. More options, for example, input touch control options, miscellaneous settings, and also internal settings such as region as well as system language. You can go to advanced feature for logs if you want to ignore JIT pop-up as well as run core on main thread, but everything else will keep it as default. Once that's done, let's reopen this emulator using Stick Debug. So here I'll press the done button, tap on connect by app, afterwards launch the MelonNX emulator, and let's try out another game which is going to be Hollow Knight Silksong. Now for some reason, some games may crash. As you guys can see, the loading was completed, but after few seconds Hollow Knight Silksong crashed. So let's just go ahead and tap on connect by app, launch MelonNX once again, and try out Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu instead of Hollow Knight Silksong. So here I'll just go ahead and launch the game, and it will take few seconds for everything to be loaded. It is recommended that you have at least iPhone 15 Pro Max or above to run this simulator. At least this is my recommendation, not the official recommendation, but it even works on iOS 26 devices, so I am running it on iOS 26. That's why there are some crashing issues. It works better with iOS 18. The performance that you get inside this emulator varies device to device. Now sometimes this emulator might freeze, but as you guys can see, our game has successfully started. But on-screen touch control issues, you need to set the control format as handheld for Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu to work, but hey, at least this game boots as well. That's pretty amazing. Anyways, I'll be making a dedicated setup video on this emulator on my iOS device as soon as this video reaches 200 likes, so make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, turn on all notification if you want to see how to set up this emulator on your own iOS devices. And if you want some gameplay videos as well, then do let me know in the comment section down below which games should I test out inside this emulator. Anyways, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.